What if the deepest, most fundamental principles of our civilization are based on a misunderstanding? What if what we have considered divine intervention for centuries was actually something completely different?
We have been deceived for 1,000 years.
However, this deception does not appear to have been deliberate. Most likely, our ancestors lied because they simply could not do otherwise. They did not have sufficient vocabulary or technological resources to describe what they actually saw. The mysteries of the ancients are hidden everywhere, in sacred texts, myths, and the ruins of forgotten cities. This investigation is not about faith. It is an attempt to understand what our ancestors really saw and why we are all so desperate to forget it. This is the story of one man who came too close to solving the mystery. Perhaps his tragic fate was meant to be a warning to everyone else. The path to this tragic denouement begins in Florence in the present day. Dr. Matthias Crow, a distinguished but long disgraced theologian and specialist in dead languages, is in his private archive, locked from the inside. He is close to panic, but it is a panic intertwined with an anxious, almost painful excitement. He calls the only person he can still trust Professor Samuel Gray.
Samuel, I was wrong. I was completely wrong about everything. He pauses briefly, listening to something outside his office. They never left us!
At that very moment, a sound is heard. It is inhuman, a dull, low-frequency hum that causes vibrations. The thick glass of the old window begins to shake from its power. The light in the office flickers, creating irregular shadows on the walls and books. They are not angels, nor are they demons. They are... To understand how he ended up in this situation, we need to go back 20 years to the quiet halls of the Vatican Apostolic Library. Young Matthias Crow is the complete opposite of that tormented shadow from the Florentine archive. He is a talented, incredibly gifted, but extremely bold theology student. His passion was not limited to ordinary religious beliefs, but extended to linguistic accuracy. This passion was more than just a hobby for Matthias. He considered language to be a code, the operating system of reality. Matthias believed that by deciphering the source code, one could comprehend the design or discover a flaw in the structure of the world. Instead of following conventional canons, he devoted his days and nights to studying Apocrypha and the most ancient, unedited versions of biblical texts, created many centuries before they were edited for the general public. His talent, reminiscent of the intuition of a genius hacker, allows him to grasp patterns where others see only metaphors. While his colleagues in the Vatican found divine inspiration in the texts, Matthias saw them as protocols, reports compiled by someone using only the terms available to him. It was Matthias who first noticed that the descriptions of the divine glory, called kavod in the Old Testament, were remarkably technical. He discovered what had been hidden in plain sight for centuries, as described in the vision of the prophet Ezekiel. For the young Matthias, Ezekiel's vision became the first step on his path. For centuries, the church and science, locked in fierce battle with each other, found common ground in one thing. Either this was divine revelation or a complex allegory by a madman. Studying the original Aramaic text, Matthias saw it as an instruction manual. He began with the skeptic's main argument: it's just a metaphor. However, Matthias asked the question, why does this metaphor have such technical detail? Why does the prophet devote entire pages to describing angles, materials, and sounds? After analyzing the archives using a linguistic approach and comparing key terms, he discovered that the word ruach, traditionally translated as Spirit of God, in the context of wheels and noise, more accurately described not spirit, but energy or driving force emanating from the mechanism. The phrase, "the spirit was in the wheels," took on an unexpected meaning. Energy powered the wheels. This was not a theological, but a technical commentary. And his analysis of cherubim turned out to be even more unexpected. He became convinced that this word was in no way related to the chubby babies of the Renaissance era. It turned out to be a borrowed Akkadian word meaning guard or, from a technical point of view, support. The sources explicitly mention their feet, which are described as straight and with sparkles resembling shining copper. Matthias suggested that these were hydraulic landing supports. They have wings that produce a loud noise, which could serve as blades, stabilizers, or ventilation grills. Around their entire perimeter are eyes, sensors, lights, or portholes, which the prophet, unfamiliar with rivets, called eyes. Matthias comes to an alarming realization. The prophet Ezekiel did not fall into religious ecstasy. Standing on the banks of the river Hovar, somewhere in Mesopotamia, he observed the landing of the craft with documentary precision. It was his first hack, as daring and impossible as if a teenager in the 1980s had tried to hack into NASA's networks. He spent hours translating the same lines, and instead of a divine chariot, a landing module appeared before his eyes. It was in Ezekiel's text that he first found a description of that sound. The prophet calls it the sound of many waters, or a noise like the noise in a camp. In his drafts, Matthias, being a scientist, notes, "a low-frequency vibration reminiscent of a powerful rotary engine or turbine." He realized that Ezekiel was not a prophet in the traditional sense, but rather a witness to technology so far beyond his understanding that the only possible way to describe it was through the language of the divine. This discovery was both a triumph and the beginning of his descent into the abyss. The deciphering of Ezekiel was only the beginning, the first fragment in a locked archive. But what about the Ark of the Covenant? What really led to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah? Matthias Crow had just opened a door that should have remained closed. On the wave of his initial success, Matthias sets out to publish what he believes will be a real scientific sensation. He calls his work The Mechanics of Ezekiel, a linguistic analysis of the divine apparatus. He does not yet realize that he is making a fatal mistake. He believes in academic integrity, in the victory of facts over dogma. He presents his work at a closed theological conference in Rome. The conference was held in a cramped hall paneled with dark wood, where elderly theologians gathered, their faces betraying their boredom. When Matthias began his presentation, the room was filled with polite silence. However, when he reached the topic of the landing supports of the cherubim and the turbine hum, the room reacted violently. It was not a scientific debate, but an expression of fierce indignation. The reaction was not just indifference, it was a real academic arrest. His mentor, Cardinal Vettori, whom Matthias considered almost his father, publicly described his report as intellectual poison. "You are mixing science fiction with theology, my son," he said with icy composure, his words sounding like a death sentence. He is immediately arrested. not by law enforcement, but by his own teachers and colleagues. He is accused of charlatanism, heresy, and deliberately distorting sacred texts for profit. His painstaking linguistic evidence is dismissed as amateurish and derogatory. His reputation is completely destroyed. His name is blacklisted. Access to the Vatican Library, which was his second home, is closed to him forever. The process of academic arrest was swift and cruel. Not only was he denied access, but his articles were also withdrawn from scientific journals. Former colleagues and yesterday's friends stopped noticing him, ignoring his calls. He became not just a heretic, but an inconvenient, toxic person. It was a false ending, and Matthias effectively gave up. Disappointed and humiliated, he left Rome and moved to Florence, to an old apartment inherited from his family, where he became an academic recluse. At this point, it seems to the viewer that the story is over. This is the tragedy of a genius destroyed by the inertia and inflexibility of the system, the church, and science. His first work remained his last. The system that destroyed him was only the tip of the iceberg. Matthias did not yet suspect that his failure had attracted the attention of more than just skeptics. Those who understood that he was right began to watch him. In this situation, the enemy was not a person, but a completely different creature. Living in voluntary exile in Florence, Matthias could not calm down. His mind craved answers. Without access to official archives, he delved into publicly available texts, now possessing a dangerous new understanding. His attention turned to Sodom and Gomorrah. He viewed this story not as a manifestation of divine wrath, but as a description of the use of a monstrous weapon. It rained fire and brimstone. In ancient Sumerian tablets, he found descriptions not only of fire from heaven, but also of the poisonous wind that accompanied it, as well as water that could not be drunk for weeks. In geological reports on the Dead Sea, he found confirmation of an abnormal temperature spike and the presence of glassy formations in the rock that could only have been caused by instantaneous exposure to extremely high temperatures. There were also descriptions of the pillar of salt into which, according to legend, Lot's wife was turned. It did not sound like a metaphor. It was like instantaneous petrification or charring under the influence of unimaginable heat. "This is not the wrath of God," he whispered. "This is an attack from orbit." His gaze was drawn to the Ark of the Covenant. Now he saw it not as a sacred object, but as a mechanical device. Matthias studied the instructions for its creation: pure gold, acacia wood, precise geometric parameters. He delved into the laws of physics. Two cherubim on the lid facing each other. These are, in essence, ideal poles, positive and negative, like a giant Leyden jar, a huge capacitor. The instructions for its use said, "Do not touch, carry only on insulated wooden poles." He learned about what happened to Uzzah, who only touched the ark to prevent it from falling and was immediately struck down, dying on the spot. He read about how the ark, when it fell into the hands of the Philistines, caused them to develop boils and tumors. Matthias compared these phenomena to the symptoms of acute radiation sickness. With a cold sweat, Matthias realized that he was reading a description of an incredible source of energy, perhaps a capacitor or even a portable reactor capable of destroying anyone who did not follow safety rules, either with deadly radiation or powerful electric current. The moment he voiced this thought, the process of escalation began. At first, it was subtle, a feeling that the air in the room was becoming heavy and dense. Then he heard that familiar sound, the sound of many waters that he found in Ezekiel. a low-frequency, barely perceptible hum that made the glass rattle. At first, he decided it was noise from construction or old pipes in the building. But the hum did not subside. It appeared exclusively at 3 o'clock in the morning. The feeling of presence grew. The feeling that someone was watching him did not leave him, even when he carefully locked all the locks. Things in his office began to move on their own. A book he clearly remembered being on the table would end up on a distant shelf. An inkwell standing on the right would shift to the left. Matthias Crow, being a scientist, tried to find rational explanations. Stress, microshocks, fatigue, distraction. He searched for them until evening, when, while describing the ark, he realized that the hum was not coming from the street. The sound was coming from inside his own locked archive. Suddenly, something or someone jerked the door handle sharply from the inside. Matthias jumped back from the archive door. He wasn't ready for this. He was a linguist, a historian, a man accustomed to facts. But this was something tangible, a palpable intrusion. His logical mind desperately tried to find an explanation, clinging to reality. A draft? The house settling? Old hinges? But he knew he was deceiving himself. The handle had been jerked once, sharply, and with obvious intent. He spent the whole night in his living room chair, listening to the low-frequency hum coming from behind the locked archive door. The sound, which had previously resembled the noise of many waters, now sounded like a vicious, restrained growl. By dawn, the hum had subsided. But Matthias Crow could not have acted differently than he did. Fear did not rule him. The researcher in him had awakened. When he encountered something unknown, he was obliged to document it. That was his special talent, his genius, which was also his curse. For 2 days, Matthias turned his apartment into a veritable laboratory. He bought digital voice recorders and placed them throughout his living space. Reliable webcams were installed on the door to the archive and on his desk in the bedroom. To record any traces, he sprinkled a thin layer of flour on the floor in front of the archive door, as if in a cheap thriller. He was a scientist, focused on experimentation. He couldn't sleep that night. He spent it in the living room, glued to his laptop, watching the camera feed. At 3 in the morning, the hum returned. But this time, it was completely different. It spread everywhere, coming not from the archive, but from the very walls of the apartment. The recorders immediately picked it up, and then all the cameras went out at once. The laptop screen went blank, and then white noise appeared in place of the camera images. A voice cut through the white noise, but it was not a human voice. It was a dry, creaky, polyphonic whisper, consisting of many voices sounding simultaneously. Not Aramaic, not Latin. They spoke a language that Matthias did not understand in words, but his brain seemed to instinctively grasp, as if on some animal level. A language reminiscent of clicks and crackles. And then it was over. The laptop went dark, and complete, lifeless silence reigned in the apartment. Matthias sat in the dark, frozen in shock. In the morning, he went into the bedroom. The cameras and voice recorders were still in their places. He looked through the recordings, but the voice recorders had only captured a hum, then a click, and then complete silence. There was no voice. The cameras also showed nothing. The last files were damaged. He looked back at the floor in front of the archive door, but the torment remained untouched. He almost felt relieved, thinking it was a complex visual and auditory deception caused by stress.
But then he glanced at the massive oak cabinet he had barricaded the archive door with, just in case. The cabinet, which he had had difficulty moving even with a mover, now stood against the opposite wall. It had not simply been moved, it had been rearranged, as if it had been deliberately moved without leaving a single mark on the parquet floor.
The entity had not simply demonstrated its presence. It had demonstrated that it was mocking him. Its actions showed that all his locks, cameras, and scientific developments were insignificant to it, like a child's game. In despair, he went into the bathroom to wash his face, and on the mirror, in the completely dry bathroom, he saw a single word written in condensation. It was a word in ancient Aramaic which he knew: "We are watching." Instead of horror, a flash of insight appeared in Matthias's eyes. The highest point of tension was the frightening realization that he had not found the truth himself, but had been led to it. He spent 3 days without sleep, leafing through his notes, and suddenly all the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. They, the entities of Ezekiel, those who brought the ark, those who destroyed Sodom, are neither evil nor noble. They are simply different. And the Bible, it's not just a holy book, it's a quarantine manual. Do not touch the ark is not a commandment, but rather an analogy to do not touch a working reactor. Do not go up Mount Sinai while it is rumbling can be compared to do not stand under the exhaust of an engine. Do not take the name of God in vain is perhaps analogous to do not activate the voice command. And Matthias understood the main, most terrifying tragedy. The system, the church, the Vatican, everyone who ridiculed him, they lied not out of malice, but out of primal fear. They did not hide the truth, but protected against it as if it were a deadly disease. For centuries they burned heretics and witches, not because of their connection to the devil, but because, through their rituals, they accidentally tried to connect with the same thing he was trying to connect with, thereby violating a certain prohibition. With his scientific arrogance, Matthias Crow did not simply hack the system, but introduced a special access code into it. He pierced the endless darkness with a spotlight, and they reacted. Then he returned to the phone to make his final call. Let's return to the scene from the prologue. Matthias Crow desperately shouts into the phone to his friend Samuel Gray. They never left. There is a growing rumble, and Matthias says in horror, "They are not angels. And they are not demons. They are—" But the call is interrupted. After that, silence falls in Matthias's archive in Florence, and the rumbling subsides. The official version will be simple and tragic. Dr. Matthias Crow, 52 years old, a brilliant but unstable scientist, died in his office from a sudden, extensive brain aneurysm, with no signs of forced entry or violence. His death was quick and, as the coroner concluded, natural. His suicide was not literal. It was systematic. He was simply erased. The fate of those involved was predictable. His only friend, Samuel Gray, flew to Florence the very next day. He was met with a wall of polite indifference. The police gave him no answers, citing natural causes. He tried to publish the recording of the last call, but he was ridiculed, accused of trying to cash in on the tragedy. A week later, the recording on his dictaphone was accidentally demagnetized. Matthias's archives in Florence, which he had collected over 20 years, simply disappeared. The owner of the apartment said that the police had sealed and removed everything.
But the police report did not mention the seizure of documents. They vanished as if they had never existed. Matthias Crow was not destroyed by the system he despised. He was destroyed by the very truth he so desperately sought. His tragedy is a warning. The mysteries of the ancients, hidden in the Bible, are not an invitation to unravel them. They are warning signs. And those whom Ezekiel saw in the sky above the river Hovar may still be watching us from behind the veil we call reality.